Hello, everyone. We have an incredible guest today. Derek Gibson is just wrapping up 30 years in banking and data governance and analytics. So, we're going to learn so much. Not only that, he's a writer of a book called Data Duped, and he's working on the next one around AI. So, we're in for an exciting discussion. Derek, I'll pass it over to you. Tell us more about yourself.
Well, thank you very much. Well, you kind of hit the highlights. I have been working in banking and finance and analytics for the better part of my career, just a little over 30 years, where I helped the organizations make hopefully good strategic decisions. I always like to say we run the business by numbers. So a part of it was helping leaders understand the numbers that underline their business and how they might drive like the next opportunity or measure the opportunities and the decisions we've made to see if we're like on the right track or do we need to modify that. So a lot of it has been around that. You also mentioned the book that I wrote with Dr. Jeff Cam from Wake Forest University called Data Duped. So that was born out of our sense of wanting to help people make better decisions with data, with information. And what we found is we were teaching students these skills, but we weren't seeing it outside the classroom or in corporate or other places. So it became like this passion project where we could help people understand kind of the basics of numbers, the basics of statistics, and then integrate it with stories of like where you see this. And surprisingly, for some people, they probably didn't discover that the things that guide their decisions or the route they take to the grocery store using Google Maps is not by chance, right? These are things by numbers that are driven mostly in a positive way. So yeah, that was a lot of my background. And so that has been a good springboard for some of my other research as I continue to teach some of the same sort of concepts with students and working on my new project, talking about AI and misinformation in our society and how our society is changing. And as a result, we need to change too.
Yeah, I think that's the number one skill, right? Is adaptation and how do we adapt to new information? How do we figure out whether the information is valid or invalid that we're being provided? I want to talk a little bit about decision making because that's an area that's also super fascinating to me. How much autonomy do we really have around our decisions? And or are they driven by things we see on TikTok or seeing our friends doing something and we're just copy them? Tell me about what you found based on the data and the book that you've written.
Well, I don't know how much it affects the things that you see and how that might affect your decisions. I think it's kind of the other way around. I think we often have some decisions we're thinking about making in our lives. Maybe it's buying a new product or something like that.
Yeah.
And that leads to searching for that product online. And before you know it, if you've done a search online, you might see that show up in your TikTok or certainly in your Facebook feed because Facebook brings in all that third party data. So it starts validating the decision you had put out there initially, which might be good. But what I worry about is it doesn't give you the chance to like explore other alternatives to that decision because those ads that you start seeing based on your searches and what you're looking at online start narrowing it down to like buying that thing.
Hmm.
And maybe there's a better alternative out there. So I think the skill that we need to work on is one, be aware that that's happening to us, that there's a Facebook or some social media platform trying to guide you towards making a decision to buy something. But how do you get outside of that and ask a completely objective question about the thing that you're looking for? Maybe it means you have to set up another profile on Facebook. It's probably not the right solution.
Probably. You have multiple profiles on Facebook or everywhere you go.
Right. That clicks on all the things you don't typically click on and see what sort of answers you get then when you do the Google search and see what comes up. I don't know what the solution is for that. But some of my research is like, how do you figure that out? And to what extent should advertisers in the industry be looking at, are they being helpful? Like, is it convenient? And it certainly is convenient that they're showing you the things that you likely want to look at and likely want to buy.
Mhm.
Or is it not good for them because they're not being an objective consumer? I think those are the things that the companies have to balance. There's no right or wrong per se. It'd be nice to have an opt in, opt out from time to time.
For sure. I think as a business, even, you said you help businesses and make decisions around their data. And how did you go about that? What did you find were some of the patterns that you saw in the data and around decision making for businesses? Are there ways, frameworks that people could use?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say one of the biggest challenges for people making decisions is relying on the average.
Mm.
Um, and I see this, I saw this time and time again, is that people would say, what's the average customer look like in terms of like income or wealth or purchasing? And the reality is that although things tend to gravitate towards the mean, and we do have normal distributions and nice bell-shaped curves on numbers, we don't always. And I think one of the skills to teach leaders is to ask about the distribution of the data around their customers and see if it's skewed one way or the other. Because if they're marketing or creating a product for their average customer, that customer may not really
Exist.
exist, right? And in many cases, you have segments, which is why segmentation strategy is great. You might have segments of one type of customer on one side of your distribution, another customer on the other side of this distribution. The average together suggests there's this third magical customer, but they don't really exist. And the strategy should be, how do we market or create a product that best serves those in individual segments and don't look at the average? So, like, really good discipline. So the framework would be a really good discipline around just basic statistics, descriptive statistics,
Mhm.
before making any decisions. That'd be the first thing. The second thing might be obvious. Don't make a decision without data. Sometimes we see this, that a decision feels right.
But I have like a gut feeling about this. It just seems
You know,
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right. So that's our bias. It's the power of the anecdotal experience that a leader or other people in the group who are making a decision have seen or heard about, and that starts to overpower the actual data. And it's really hard to give up on that. So what happens is, this is more like into the psychology of decision making, that we have this strong confirmation bias that once we set our mind to a decision, we almost feverishly seek out the data that reinforces it, that reaffirms that our brilliant conclusion, even before the analysis was done, was correct. And you also you probably refer to this or heard of this as like cherry picking the data. That sort of thing that's going on. It's really hard to sort of step back and say, wait a second, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I haven't been objective about this because I've got all this anecdotal evidence and people in my ear telling me these are the things that we're supposed to do. But the evidence is not necessarily supporting that. I think
An
great leaders do
example, like a story or an example, I'm always, or something you could share if it's not like proprietary,
that.
of things that were just like everyone was sure it was this average customer and it actually was this segment, or some kind of decision that was made and how people were cherry picking around.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to give away anything sort of proprietary, but I would say in general, this probably happens a lot, like looking at, say, banking customers.
Yeah.
And if you look at the average checking account or retirement account that's being opened, those numbers are probably skewed because maybe the typical person puts in $2,000 or $3,000 a year into their retirement account, but there are some other people who put in like the maximum amount,
Hmm.
and that would skew their balance a lot higher. And that could cause people to think about a marketing campaign that was more designed towards the higher end of that number versus the average typical.
Yeah.
So so again, really great leaders start out with a structured approach to like framing the problem and being objective first and then designing the strategy second. And I know that sounds like everybody should do that, but I think it's like the best way to approach something is, let's tell me everything you can about the customer. So here's my advice. If you are a leader with an analytics team working for you, ask those questions, but don't lead the answers, right?
Got it.
Ask, give me everything you can to describe what our customers are, what they're doing, what they're buying, what their behaviors are, and then lay that out on the table and work with your strategy folks to develop what's the best strategy to approach those customers.
So gather the data first. Don't make assumptions that will lead you
Right,
to cherry pick the data that
right,
supports your assumptions.
right.
That's so
And
hard to
probably
do because we want to do the opposite, right? We want to have a hypothesis. Oh, I'm sure this is the right approach, right?
right. Which is good as long as you treat it as a hypothesis and not the conclusion,
Not the
right? That
conclusion.
is the basic scientific method. Again,
Yeah.
another framework, right? Start with what your hypothesis is, test your data, compare it to your outcomes, and come to a conclusion. If not, adjust your hypothesis and go around. It's a circular framework. So these sort of structured approaches to analyzing data and coming up with answers or looking for opportunities is a great way to start.
So do you think AI is good at that, like looking at the patterns in the data? Or do you think there are also biases within AI itself? Like, how can we collaborate with artificial intelligence? Because, I
Yeah.
mean, it runs on data, right?
Yeah.
To make better assumptions or hypotheses.
I think you're right. AI is that productivity consultant, like a member of your team.
Mhm.
There was a study recently where they looked at an individual working on their own, an individual working with AI, or an individual working within a team, and then a team with AI to see which came up with the best results. And we all know from, you know, decades of studies that a team approach versus an individual
Yeah.
will always come up with better results. Team is better than just a person alone, right? Because the members of the team, they collaborate, they have different ideas, diversity of thought come in, and there's almost like this synergy that happens when individuals get together. That one idea creates another idea, which creates another idea, and something that individuals on their own may not have come up with. The study concluded that an individual working with AI as a teammate was as good as a team without AI. So there's like this increase in creativity might be the wrong word, but increase in expanding the thoughts and ideas around a particular problem because AI brings that to the table. So I think it is very good
Yeah.
at helping us think about strategy and broadening how we approach problem solving. And that may not be the thing that people think of AI as the most useful tool. I think today most people are using it as like a data retrieval tool, like the old
Mhm.
search tool, right? Like go to AI and tell me, what's the population of a particular country, and then you get an answer, right? Which it's good for. And people maybe are using it to like summarize their emails. But I think the real advantage of AI is using it as like this proxy for another member of your team to help you think outside the box or just think more broadly because they have more knowledge than maybe any one individual in the team. So I think that's where we're going to see this lift, hopefully across all industries because of AI.
I really love that. I love that approach, right? You still have to verify. One thing I really wanted to ask you was around critical thinking. It's the answers, the people who don't want to work with AI, they always give me example. Well, I asked it something and it was wrong. Like, can you imagine how can I use AI because, it hallucinates. There's depending on how well it was trained on that data, it could hallucinate more or less. And so there's definitely that trust component. So, what can we as individuals, instead of saying, I'm not going to use this, how do we really use AI and govern it, right? Ask the right questions so we don't just, get the best out of it and not the worst, I guess.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think it is maintaining a healthy level of skepticism
Hmm.
about the information you get from AI. Just you mentioned the hallucinations that has gotten much better, but they still exist. Some of the researchers, I believe at Anthropic, have stated that they'll never go away because of the nature of generative AI. It is intended to generate new things, not just be a data retrieval tool. That's old internet search, right? So to the extent that there's always going to be like generative parts of it, we're going to have this risk of factual information being misquoted. On the positive side, that generative part helps you generate new creative, productive ideas, like the example I just shared before. So I think that skepticism is what remains. And being able to verify information as you go along. At the state we are right now with AI, this is what I teach folks, is you need to think of AI as this really smart new person who joined your company, but has no context about what you really do,
Yeah.
right? Unless you explicitly tell AI, that I'm working for this manufacturing company and this is the part we make. And here are the things in our history that have gone wrong. AI won't know that inherently. You could tell it to go look that up if it's something it can learn, but
Right.
in most cases, it's something you have to teach them. So think of it as like this really smart new employee who's joined your company, but they have no idea about the context of what you do. And I think in that sense, if you had a new employee working on a new project and you're the manager, you would be really diligent at verifying their work when they turned it in. I mean,
Mhm.
that skill never goes away, I don't think. Maybe the level in which you verify your work goes down just over time, just like it would with your new employee. They're going to get smarter. They're going to know your business a little bit better. They're going to know the decisions you can make. They might eventually learn the political dynamics of your company and how decisions are made and how to present them. And everything on up, right? To like what's your presentation standards and all that sort of thing. But you can't just say, create a presentation deck, publish it, and send. You've got to be supervising, especially initially. So I think that's the approach. And being a good manager is also like being a good researcher, right? So even though you might not be managing a person, if you're looking at AI results, think of yourself as the best scholarly librarian you can be. When you get the results from something,
Yeah.
does it make sense? How can you check a few things? Don't blindly put that out there. And some of the feedback I've gotten from folks is that they are a bit frustrated, that especially managers, that there is this high level of trust that staff are putting in AI and the results, and they're about quickly trying to get things done. And the advice there is the same as what I've been saying here is that don't think of AI as doing the job for you. Think about stretching your abilities and growing what you can do. If you're the type of employee who's just like doing retrieval with AI to get a result, then you're probably vulnerable. That's not the value you add, to
Yeah.
the company or the
I actually
organization.
have a coworker like that. He's incredible at embracing AI, which I really love about it. But then he keeps sending us all of these documents. So he just generates them with AI, right? Like, here are the three strategies for this account. Based on this meeting, here's how we're going to do this. But again, AI misses, like you were saying, context. And so maybe when I read that 10 pages from AI, I get like one thing that applies to my account because there's just always dynamics, right? There's people, there's business processes, there's current situation around where they're trying to go that AI just doesn't have any context on. So whatever it generates, yes, it's a best practice to go and, improve your AI search visibility, but they're not there yet. They're so far from that. They're like need to go to step one, but AI doesn't have that visibility. So the advice is good, but it's not good for that company for that time in that company's life. And I end up being frustrated because I'm like, okay, this guy just sent me another PowerPoint and I just stop reading it. Not because it's
Right.
bad advice, like it's probably good, like best practices, but I'm like, where I am with the account, what I'm trying to convince them of is not even close in this document because again it's missing that context about awareness of where something can go from where that account is. So I don't know if more people will start using AI in that way, and I just like, yes, I love that you're using it, but can you read through that documentation and research and just like pick out three or four things that will be valuable to us based on what we know as a group and then send that to me, because that would save me a lot of time.
That is a great story. So back to like my example of AI is like this new employee in your company without context.
Yeah,
They're also a very eager employee.
right.
And you may have experienced when new people join your team, they want to demonstrate all the things they can do. And I think AI is a bit like that. So that's probably why you're getting a 10-page report instead of a 2-page report.
Right.
They're giving you the answer, they're showing you their work, like we ask for in the classroom, and then they're showing you three or four other things. And we try to guide people towards being effective communicators, and communicating with impact is so important because all the things that it's giving you in that multi-page report that your employee is giving you from AI
Yeah.
is useful, good things.
Yeah.
But the human in the loop process is what matters here,
Yeah.
what's important, what are the realistic decisions that can be made, what are the constraints, right? Do you have budget for something? Do you have leaders that have a passion project that that's going to overrule this thing? All those things I don't think AI can bring. So this is where your example shouldn't be someone just using AI to replace what they normally do. It should be how do they stretch their capabilities, right, and build on what AI can do for them, and also ask for concise
Yeah.
communication.
Concise communication is key because we get bombarded with information now because it is so cheap, right? It
Right.
used to take, I mean, I'm dating myself in school, right? To write a paper, I would have to go to the library and I would check magazines and books and I would sit there for hours pulling out information and summarizing it, trying to make sense of all of it. Now, all that whole process, right, is like I go into AI mode for Google search and I got my summary and my answer, right? So now all that hours that I would spend in the library trying to figure this out are shortcut, right? And the answer is pretty good. Like it's good enough.
It's good enough.
Yeah. So, and you teach students, right? I always think about my own daughter and my own son, like, where do we go from here? How do they, as AI becomes more prevalent in what they do every day, how do they continue to improve their skill set that's actually going to help them grow in their careers?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. A few years ago in teaching students about business analytics, it was all about, not all about, there was a big emphasis on teaching the most popular coding languages. And the belief was, because there was such a demand for data scientists, as they were called at the time, that if you could code, you would get a job, just about anywhere, because that was how you did it. That has quickly changed with the current environment, and it had even been changing, I think, before AI really came on the scene. And it's changed to the point where it's not about teaching a specific coding language. It's about teaching the foundations of coding languages and what do they do and how to structure answers, structure code to get answers towards an analysis or a problem. So I think it's great that you could take AI, again, your example is a young person going into industry and say, go solve this problem. But the skill now is like, what is the problem you want to solve? What are the approaches? What type of analysis would you be doing? Start with that basic descriptive analytics and move towards insight analytics and maybe predictive analytics. But if you don't know the stages of analytics, you don't know the questions to ask, and then you don't know the code that you need to create to work with the data that with your company. So I think those are still the basic skills. So it's not tool specific, but it is still being focused on asking the right questions, which is why data science has really transitioned to intelligence, data intelligence, or focused more on what I'm trying to describe is it's focused more on the decision making rather than the tools and the inputs that you want. So decision scientists
So,
are
do
really
you
the
recommend people go into data science today? What do you see as a career path in analytics for people just starting out?
Yes, I think, yes, the answer is, and pick a program like ours that is focused more on decision making, problem solving, and having impact in industry, less on specific tools, because the tools will be changing all the time,
Changing.
right? One of the things that we always want to emphasize is that you have to be a continual learner. So as AI even is evolving, we're going to have, Chat GPT 6 and 7 and 10, before we know it. We need to evolve with that and be a continual learner about how to best use those tools. So I think those are the big things.
Yeah. Continue with learning. You're writing books, you're learning all the time. How would you recommend that other people in the industry or just wanting to learn more, where do they start? How do you keep your learning going?
Read a lot, I guess,
Yeah.
is my answer. But AI is actually pretty good for this. There are a few, newsletters and folks that I follow online.
Okay.
It's impossible to read all their newsletters every day, but I have set up AI to read my newsletters for me. So newsletters are summaries of information. I'm using AI to summarize the summaries of the information, and the AI that I've set up knows my particular interest, right, around data privacy or AI in society and the cultural impacts of that sort of thing. So it'll pick out things of interest to me. So I think that's a skill that we'll need to continue to look at.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to look at those footnotes and references in those things that you find. I find those are the most interesting things to go and read a particular study because the context of how it shows up in your newsletter might be a little off. So going into the absolute source is really helpful.
Because it's somebody's interpretation of that footnote versus the actual data, right?
A
So,
little bit, yeah.
yeah.
Or there's other parts of that study that might be of interest to me. So setting up with that is really important. Of course, the big platforms publish research all the time. So OpenAI and Anthropic have regular papers. They're excellent sources. So I'd recommend looking at those on a regular basis.
I want to ask you, you mentioned data privacy, and that's kind of a passion of mine as well.
Mm.
A lot of people are worried about there's a lot of regulation coming out. There's state laws now. There's, you mentioned earlier, Australian law that came out around the AI, and that's continuing to evolve. What do you see in terms of data privacy in the future?
Yeah, I think people are at different places on their journey or their comfort level with data privacy. I think before this AI era, we were very concerned about people getting our personal information, right? So your name, your address, your social security number, other information about you, and there have been countless very public data breaches that got our attention and got people very worried, and everybody's kind of got a tight grip on their credit report because they're worried about fraud. I think the data from those data breaches is not as robust as the data that exists from other sources from social media. Social media knows you better than your spouse. They know your political affiliations, they know your interests, whether you like to go sailing or fly fishing or sports on the weekends. It knows these things about you because of the information you freely, but maybe not knowingly, give to them. So it's a different dynamic about data privacy. Having worked in highly regulated industry, we are concerned about those personal identifiable information attributes, right? The PII information. So again, your name, your address, your account information, things like that. Absolutely need to protect that. What I don't see is much regulation around protecting the other information about you that social media is collecting for mostly for their engagement and ultimately their advertising revenue purposes. That might be really eye-opening. My advice for folks is if you don't believe that's true, most all the platforms allow you to do this. Go and download your information from TikTok. Go download your information from Facebook. Every like, comment, share you've had ever on Facebook can
How
be
do you do
downloaded.
that? Is there like a setting in your profile that you would have?
Yeah, if you go to settings, you'll find that you can
Okay.
download your information. You can also do that on LinkedIn. People are probably not sharing as much on LinkedIn in that regard, but Facebook is pretty broad. It's a pretty broad data set. And then if you're a data scientist, decision scientist, like-minded person, think about what that data could be used for,
Mm.
right? So then to kind of bring it back to data privacy and the implications, I think as a society, not just ours in this country, but around the world, we have to ask ourselves: Are we comfortable with that? And I've written a few posts about this. It's we're giving up information about ourselves for the convenience of in my news feed. I get news that I like to read. It's matched with my interests. I get offered products that I want. It saves me time from searching for them. That's good. But that's balanced with they know all this information about me. And what if my interests change? How do I
You
unravel the
almost can't
algorithm?
get out of it, right? Because you're in this constant loop of being fed information. I've noticed that on Instagram. Like I started working out recently, so I've liked a few like workout people, and all I see in my feed is like how to do different weightlifting exercise. And I'm like, is that all I'm gonna do the rest of my time? They're just gonna feed me more and more of these people because my feed now is completely saturated with that. Not that I mind, but it just like it shows me
Right.
how much it gets impacted. And what amazes me personally is sometimes like I've recently went to a party with my college friends, and when you get yourself out of that world where you're not online and you're seeing actual people with other interests and other perspectives, it's like, wow, this feels so strange. Like your brain is just surprised. It's like, what do you mean? You don't see workout videos every other time? You don't think about this day and night? It's just, I know it sounds silly, like it's natural. Like, of course, people are different, but we start living in this virtual world that's created based on our interests, and we forget that there's so many more interesting dynamics to topics that we don't even.
I love that story. It's such a real world example of like we should all get together with our friends, whether your
Yeah,
college friends or your book club, and have everybody pull up their phone and it's like tell us what you're seeing in your scroll, or
right.
just talk about what your interests are and seeing if they're different. Great exercise too is you find somebody who maybe has a different perspective on something, whether it's politics or data privacy, or has different hobbies than you, and just kind of like do a mini interview and say, well, what do you see in your feed, or what do you find that's
That's
interesting?
so interesting.
How do you spend an idle hour, and then put down the phone for a few minutes and just have a conversation with them, and then judge if that is different than what you're seeing in your feed. The fear here is that the platform algorithms will shape who we are, but it might not be who we want to be.
Right.
Right. And if we can, how do we explore things that are new and different, except for the randomness of the algorithm showing us things that are new and different? And I'm sure they do that too. But how will we have that, black swan moment where we'll discover something completely different? Uh, Probably won't do that scrolling through your news feed. It'll probably come from a conversation or visiting a different place and experiencing
Exactly.
a
Or a
different culture.
museum, just like I feel like even with museum, even you have curated collections of, art, for example, you still get inspired because it's different. It's curated by someone other than you, for lack of a better
Mm-hmm.
word, right? And you're seeing a perspective that's outside of yours every day versus when you're in the social media world, you're just like it's like your mind on steroids. You're just getting fed and refed information that's been accumulated in your brain for better or for worse, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and to get back to the data privacy and the regulation part
Yeah.
of it, just a sort of commentary on the industry right now is everybody is moving really fast.
Hmm.
There is, as you probably know, an enormous amount of funding behind all of the projects in the billions and billions of dollars, whether it's Microsoft or OpenAI or Anthropic. Data centers have become like the word of 2025, I think, like the most powerful thing. And it's, I think, this enthusiasm around the capabilities that's driving that. But because it's moving so fast, I think they're focused on the good and the positive outcomes. I have not seen enough discussion around sort of the negative outcomes. I mean, a few things like Anthropic has published some papers around cybersecurity threats and how their tools are being used in nefarious ways. That's great. I would love to see more collaboration among the platforms. There should be a conference on data AI self-regulation. And right now it's kind of left to some individual companies doing their own self-controls on these things. We've got some governments doing some regulation like in Europe.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be saying that we should be hindering the industry because good things could come from it, but I think those things should run a bit in parallel. And maybe that's because my years of experience working in a regulated industry. It's great to think about the positive outcomes. We do need to have some people think about the less positive outcomes, and are we mitigating enough of those risks along the way? The analogy I always give to folks when I'm presenting is that the automotive industry really exploded in the early 1900s with Model T Ford and the Ford's assembly line production. But it took about 10 years before the first stop sign was installed. And I think we need a little more stop signs every once in a while, not
Right.
to slow down, but just to make sure that we're not going off the rails and causing too much harm.
Yeah, because AI can, and I know we're not talking about AGI in any way, but that's a whole other
The other
discussion,
topic, yes,
a whole other
let's come back
topic.
to it.
But AI kind of like it's generative, like we were saying, it's non-predictive. Like you put in the same question, you could get 300 different answers to the same question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as humans, we find hardship with that, right? Like we need to have it more regulated to the point where if there is a right answer, we at least have some sort of a check process. We um, a quick story is really around radiology. Doctors in radiology, that read people's scans now, it's being outsourced to AI. And I have a lot of radiology doctor friends, and they're like, "Oh, everyone's talking about productivity. Now I can read 300 scans a day versus 100 scans I could do by myself." But then as a human, my mom who heard about this said, "Well, I don't want AI reading my scan because I just want a really good doctor. Like, how do I know that AI is not going to miss something, right?"
Yeah,
So there's that, right? To your point around stop signs is like, yeah, sure, we can be so much more productive, but the question is that AI because it hasn't seen a certain condition or that doctor that has the confirmation bias that AI is always right, it's going to miss something on that scan that maybe they wouldn't have missed otherwise if they were looking at the scan themselves from the ground up.
yeah, right. And that's the other side. That's the distrust of AI.
Yeah.
And so maybe we all need to figure out how do we get to a reasonable level of trust with AI.
Yeah. Well, you're going to help us do that, Derek, right?
I hope so. I
Yeah.
hope so.
I look forward to your next book. I think that's going to be amazing as you kind of dive into this topic around governance and AI. When is the book coming out? What's the schedule?
We're looking at fall of 2026.
It's coming up fast.
It is.
Well, we'll have to have you back on to talk about that. That will be exciting.
That will be great. I would love to come back and talk to you about that.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. This was a great discussion.
It was. I enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.